Hi, this is Mrs. Dahman. Today we're going to look at comparing settings found in a story. Now, sometimes in a story, there will only be one setting. It takes place in one location. But other times, there will be more than one location. And based on what and where the author describes the setting, it can change the way you as the listener or reader feel about the story. It kind of sets a tone or sets a mood, and it's important to pay attention to those details and the facts that support them, simply because it builds a picture in our mind about what's happening in the story and where it's happening. So I'd like you to pull up your Compare Settings worksheet response sheet, and we'll go over this together. The key component with this is we're reviewing things that many of us learned in 3rd and 4th grade and revisiting them because they're applicable to what we're doing now. And each component separately, comparing characters, comparing settings, and comparing events, independently gives you separate ideas. And in the past, that's what you've worked on, understanding what each of those components mean. And so today we're revisiting them with the understanding that we're going to put those components together, and we're going to build a bigger, deeper understanding of the text we're reading based on utilizing all of those elements. So bear with me, we'll get there, I promise. All right, comparing settings. The setting of a story or drama is where and when it takes place. How to compare settings. Look for words and phrases that describe the setting. Now remember, the setting is where it happens. So it could be in a school, it could be in a home, it could be in the living room, it could be outside in the yard, it could be on a playground. The setting can essentially be anywhere. And paying attention to that builds a picture in our brain of what's happening with the characters in the story and supports the plot. Use the words and phrases to create a visualization of the setting. Now remember, a visualization is just a picture in your mind. You are visualizing what the author is telling you. You're taking the details and the information, and you're accessing what you already know with what the author is telling you, and you're coming up with the visual picture. That is a visualization. Make sure that your visualization is supported by text evidence. And this is key to really understanding the details and depth of a story. It's easy to input what we expect to see or hear versus what the author is telling us actually is taking place. So if the story says it takes place in a desert, maybe we have an idea in our mind of a hot, dry, arid, sandy place. But not all deserts are the same, and at different times of the year, deserts can be frightfully cold, even if they're hot during the day. And desert doesn't always imply sand. High deserts often have stubbly trees and a lot of rocks. So it's important to make sure that we're reading the text and using information from the text to build our visualization of a setting so that we're understanding what the author wants us to know. Ask yourself, does the setting change throughout the story? For example, yesterday in Cinderella, we only read a brief bit, and it talks about Cinderella's house, or where she was doing the chores, and then when Cinderella meets with the fairy godmother, and then when she's at the ball, and then when she's back at the house. So the setting changed throughout the story, and we get a different visual impact based on where she was at the time in the story. And how does the setting contribute to the plot? What contribution does it make? Well, when we're picturing in our mind Cinderella's house, we might have one idea. But the palace, when we're talking about where the ball takes place, we probably have a very different idea in our mind about what it looks like. Now, this particular story was a very short story. Maybe longer stories have more detail about the grandeur and the palatial nature of the palace. You know, the stairs up to it, the big dancing ballroom with the high arched ceilings and those types of things. So each story is going to provide a little bit different information about the settings, just depending on how detailed the story is. All right, let's read this excerpt from Cinderella. Again, it's based on the video we watched yesterday, but it may have a little bit different twist or a little bit more detail to help us identify the setting. It was the child who scoured the pots and pans, scrubbed the floors, washed down the stairs, polished the tables, ironed the linen, cleaned the stockings, darned the stockings, and made the beds. She herself slept at the top of the house in a garret, upon a wretched straw mattress, while her sisters had apartments of their own. So we already know, based on what we just read there, that it's a multi-story house. It has at least 2 levels, and that she sleeps in the very top, which is traditionally reserved for like the attic where you store things, or households, help, caregivers, that type of thing. It's not a desirable location, because when it's cold out, that might be a little bit colder, or when it's hot out, that area is definitely going to be a little bit hotter. Whereas her sisters had apartments of their own. Now, maybe that just means really big rooms, but an apartment generally means bigger than a standard bedroom. Okay, so that was the setting from Cinderella's house, or where she was living with her stepmother and stepsisters. Next scene is in the royal palace and in the royal gardens, over which shone the same stars which had looked down upon Cinderella's pumpkins. The ball was at its height, with scores and scores of couples dancing on the waxed floor to the music of the violins, and under the trees, where the music throbbed in faint echoes, other scores of couples moving, passing, and repassing, listening to the splash of the fountains and inhaling the sweet scent of the flowers. All right, so that's a completely different setting. Score is 20 years, basically. When they use the term, say, 7 years ago, that means 4 times 20, so 80. 7, so 87 years ago. We see that in Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. But a score is essentially 20 years. So when they're talking about scores and scores of couples, that's sets of 20 couples, and there's a whole bunch of them. So that gives us an image in our mind of a whole lot of people. And this place is large enough to hold a whole lot of people. It talks about big trees moving, throbbing, music throbbing under trees. And so, there have to be a lot of trees if they're holding scores of people, or if they're covering or shading scores of people. So we know that the 2 settings are very different, but again, they're within the same story. Okay, words and phrases that describe setting 1. Setting 1 was Cinderella's house. Let's see, words and phrases that describe her house. Well, we know there's a kitchen. We know there's stairs, washed down the stairs. So we know there's at least 2 stairs. Most houses have tables and linens and floors and shoes and beds. So that's not necessarily unique. The palace probably had those. But she herself slept at the top of the house in a garret. A garret. Now, a mental vision of a garret is probably a small, tiny, cramped space, right? Upon a wretched straw mattress. And that vision implies not a very comfortable bed. A straw mattress is something that kind of like a pallet that you put on the floor. So we can use those 2 pieces. A garret, straw mattress, while her sisters had apartments of their own. And again, apartment is a key word because it implies something larger than a bedroom. All right. Words and phrases that describe setting 2. So if Cinderella's home was the first setting, the royal palace was the second setting. And even the name, royal palace, royal gardens, that gives you an idea that it's a little bit more magnificent. But keys like scores and scores of couples. That means 20s and 20s of couples. That means it's a whole lot of people. So that describes the size. We know something's got to be big to house that many people. Under the trees. So we know all those people are under the trees. Couples are moving, passing, and repassing. So that's big enough for them to all move around carefully. And we know there's a fountain because they're listening to the flat splash of the fountains and inhaling the sweet scents of the flowers. So we know there's a garden with lots and lots of flowers, and we know there's at least a fountain because they're hearing that splash. Sorry, there was a typo in here. It says plash of the fountains, but it's supposed to be splash. So there's setting 1 and setting 2. And the next question is, how does setting 1 contribute to the plot? Well, it tells us where Cinderella and her sisters lived. It tells the kind of lifestyle she lived compared to her stepsisters. It tells you that she's at the very top in a very unattractive or unappealing quarters, whereas her stepsisters have a little bit nicer places. We know already that Cinderella does all the work. So you can see there that they're unequal in their rooms and what they've assigned or what they've been assigned to live in. They're treated very differently based on that. And how does setting 2 contribute to the plot? Well, we know it's a grand place. It's certainly much nicer than what Cinderella's used to if she's used to sleeping in the garret. And we know that it's got to be huge. It's got to be grand. It's got to be elegant and fancy because of all the people that are able to move around comfortably in it. Talks about the gardens and the sweet scent of the flowers. So it's not a run-down garden, it's a nicely kept garden. And it's got a fountain, and you can hear the splash of the fountain. So it's not a fountain that has died, it's a fountain that is functioning and quite probably beautiful. All right, make sure that you answer the exit ticket underneath this worksheet because that's going to be the key. You're absolutely welcome to put your own words and phrases, making sure that you use pieces directly from the text. But you're welcome to put your own responses in these 4 boxes, but you're also welcome to use similar responses to what we just discussed. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time for describing events.